Great. Welcome.
Hey everyone, what a great crowd we have so far. Welcome to everyone.
It's so good to be back.
Yes.
And we're going to have so much fun today.
So welcome to our Octavia Try to Tell Us Parable for today's pandemic series.
It has been, I don't know, this is a bright spot, I think, for both of us in the midst
Yeah.
of really some challenging times since we've begun this back in May. And we've just been really encouraged, I think, by being able to gather here and to know
Yeah.
you all are here with us, thinking about these things, strategizing, planning, surviving, and surviving. I think
Yeah,
that's
I was going to say, look, period. After surviving,
period.
we're trying to move past surviving to thriving, but first you have to survive. So just to withstand the emotional storms, and unfortunately, it feels like the landscape is worse and worse since we started in May. Unbelievably, since it was already so bad when
Right.
we started in
Who
May.
who would have thought, right?
Well, Octavia might have actually. Now that you mention it, Octavia, had
Right.
we had the opportunity to talk to her, probably would have laid out much of this for us.
Exactly. You're so right. You're so right. Although we had some bright spots too. We've had a couple bright spots. And so I remember the session we had it talking about some of the resistance and the revolution and
That's
that,
true. That's
right?
true. Resistance and revolution, and that must continue. And this is where we, in part, get the strength is by gatherings like this, Earthseed gatherings, let's call them, so that we can refresh and reframe and keep our hope and
Keep our
remember our lessons. The only lasting truth is change. So changes cannot and should not surprise us. And we roll with those changes,
and
and we
yet
root.
and yet what the shape of which change is coming is always still a little bit jarring, I think.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we're so excited about today's guest. So I will begin with our presentation just to give
Yes.
introductions because some people are new here, and then we'll get started. So give me just a moment. So Octavia tried to tell us. Ah, there we go. To talk a little bit about our time together, we'll begin with our introductions, our conversations, and Q&A. Many of you gave us great questions ahead of time, so we're going to start with those. Again, if you are tweeting, even if you're on Instagram, please use the social media tag, hashtag Octavia Tried. There are so often rich conversations there. And when we're done, Tananarive and I come in and chat and see what you've been talking about and join that conversation. So please use the hashtag Octavia Tried. It is my joy to introduce my friend, Tananarive Due, an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She is an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years. Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. And her writings have been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the right for civil rights. She is married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays. They live with their son Jason and 2 cats. And you can find her on Twitter at Tananarive Due.
That was lovely. Even the cats got in. My friend, the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, is professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, that is the church of my grandmother. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles and book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017 Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion and mental health, and sexual and domestic violence. You can also find her at Monica A. Coleman, right? Is that your Twitter?
I think
Or
I
your
just changed.
Instagram?
I just changed it actually. So now it's Rev Dr. Monica.
Rev Dr. Monica on Twitter and Instagram. And we are so excited about our guest today.
So please introduce.
The wonderful Merrilee Heifetz. I've had so many, I've had opportunities to appear with her on panels. I'm so happy that she was able to join us here today. Merrilee Heifetz represents authors of books for adults and children, including several #1 New York Times bestsellers and recipients of major awards and honors. She represented MacArthur Grant recipient Octavia E. Butler for the last 18 years of her life. And since 2006, has been the literary executor of the Butler estate, for which she oversees licensing film and TV rights, translations, stage rights, permissions, and advises on scholarships and charities benefiting writers of color. Her children's book authors have won, among them, 3 Newbery Medals, and she would love to find more quality storytellers of diverse backgrounds. And that is Merrilee Heifetz. She is, I believe, at Merrilee Heifetz on Twitter, which is where I first heard that Parable of the Sower had reached the New York Times bestseller list because of her tweet, and caused many, many celebrations across the entire internet. So many celebrations. And there's even an article in Slate magazine online about it today, her Octavia's Rise. So welcome to Parable for Today's Pandemic. If you are on Twitter, please do tweet either your impressions, your screenshots, or your thoughts under the Octavia Tried hashtag.
Now let's chat.
Yay, welcome to Merrilee Heifetz. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure she'll show up any moment.
I'm waiting to be allowed in.
There you are. There you are.
Okay.
We don't see your video yet, so you may need to fiddle with you may need to fiddle with the video display so we can.
I keep trying.
Oh, okay.
I think somebody has to allow it.
Oh, okay. Maybe the host needs to enable the video for our guest, Merrilee Heifetz. So welcome, Merrilee, while we're waiting for your video to turn. Oh, there you are.
Here I am. Hello.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Well, I want to first start by acknowledging that in the midst of ongoing grief and trauma that we've all been suffering in 2020, there was a major loss yesterday in the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice. Shocking to many of us, despite her age and our knowledge of her illnesses. We have seen her as such a fighter that I don't think anyone expected to see that headline assault us. There's no other word last night, and lead to some sleepless nights and many, many tears. So I just wanted to acknowledge that loss and how it, I think, even makes it more important for us as this Earthseed group to gather.
It does. You know, I think so much about the ways in which Parable of the Sower warns us in many ways, right? About the politics, right? About the, well, it's our show, we'll say it, the erosion of democracy, the increased gap between the poor and the wealthy. And, you know, in so many ways, you know, I'm thinking of her, so many civil rights figures who, you know, have passed in 2020. You know, the people who are really fighting for freedom and for justice and for inclusion. It's just a tough one.
It's a very tough one.
It is, and I think, you know, Octavia was so, obsessed really with trying to look at where we were when she was writing her books, the 90s, the early 90s when she was writing Parable, and you know, she just took in information from science, politics, geography, you know, everything, sociology, and race, and she just kind of put it all in her head and came up with the world of parable, which is where we're now living. And, I think she would be horrified to have predicted it. I think what she really wanted was for people to read her books and then not have this happen. But she, more and more people are reading her books. As you said, she, for the first time, was on the bestseller list. I was just amazed when I saw that. We get the list every week and you open it up and just, what? And I was completely overwhelmed just because I knew that was one of her personal goals. Because she just, she really wanted as many people as possible to read her books, which is what, of course, most authors want. And, to have it happen now is just kind of, it's mind-boggling, really.
Well, let's turn to that celebration, because all of us are aware on one level that the reason that she's on the bestseller list has to do with sort of the climate we're in, and that's sort of the underbelly of it. But on the surface, the triumph, the fact that she literally wrote the words to predict her own future and to direct her own future, the joy she would feel. Since you knew her so well, if you could just elaborate a bit on what it would have been like, you think, if you had been able to share that moment with her, like with a telephone call, how she would have reacted to this news.
Right.
Well, I can't say I knew her that well. I knew her in a specific way. I knew her as her agent. And, it would have been it's such a joy to call her up and tell her this. And I can imagine, she was not a screamer or, that kind of person at all.
Right.
I think I would have gotten one of her, oh my goodness,
Understated, yes.
Yes, possibly. Are you sure? And, I think she, I think it would have been, it would have made her so, so happy. But at the same time, she looked at everything as I saw it. She took everything with a grain of salt. And, she would have been, as I said, very, very happy, but she also would have immediately, I think, thought, okay, now that's happened. That's good. I keep working. She was such a hard worker and lived for her writing and created a life where she could do that. And it was wonderful to be able to call her, during the 18 years that she was alive, when I represented her, I could just call her and, get an earful. I mean, she listened to NPR. She listened to books on tape while she walked. She didn't drive. And she liked to take really long walks. And she would, just take in as much information as she could. Mostly she talked to me about reading nonfiction. I think the fiction she read, I mean, I've seen her book collection, so I know she had a lot of fiction, but mostly we talked about nonfiction. And I think that was how, that was the mud and the wood and, the straw from which she built her books, was science and reality. And, back when she was writing those books, you didn't have, I don't think you had science denial as a, government policy. There were science deniers, but I don't think it was the way it is now. I think, like many people, she would just be completely appalled because she was such a person of fact and science, even though she wrote science fiction.
Right. I mean, I just feel like I've got to ask about Parable of the Trickster, right?
Yeah.
Can we have Parable of the Sower, we have Parable of the Talents, and any of us who've gotten to just peek inside the Huntington have seen some of her notes about Parable of the Trickster. And I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about it, what we might have gotten, if there's any plans to posthumously publish things that she's written from that,
Well,
or are we just left to wonder?
I feel it's really important to publish anything we decide to publish that wasn't published in her lifetime. You want to publish it carefully and with context, because you have to respect the fact that she didn't publish it and she didn't finish it, but the Octavia Butler, certainly that I knew, would not have wanted a book that she hadn't finished published. However, I also think, so long after her death, she would also understand that, there is a context for it for people to read. So I'm working on it. We're discussing it. I think it's important to do it, but we have to do it right. And of course, at the moment, you can't go to the Huntington. I mean, it's not, they're not open. And it's such a wonderful place, and it's such a great institution. They're terrific people, and they want to do everything that they can, and they do so much to, just to promote her work and her life and the study of her.
I know you must get asked this a lot, but every time I go to the Huntington, or when I'm sitting at the audience, say for the Parable of the Sower opera that Toshi Regan and her mom, Bernice Johnson Regan, did, and I just have my mind blown, I can't help but just try to put myself in Octavia's place and wonder what kind of reaction she would have had to this reception to her work, and based on what you knew of her, and I think we get a hint of it from her, how you imagine her reaction to the New York Times list, but how would she have processed this?
Wow. I watched her go from being someone who was, and remained very shy, but especially after she got the MacArthur, she had to do so much public speaking. And I think, having come out of the science fiction world and going to science fiction conventions where you meet people and you're on panels and you read your work, she definitely had to experience a lot of that. But it was hard for her. So, but I watched her, become someone who would go to her signings and her events, and there would be people lined up out the door, and they would come to her, and they would be speechless with, they couldn't believe they were standing in front of Octavia Butler. Sometimes
that would be someone like me, yes.
Yeah.
Like everyone here, yes.
Right. And she was, of course, very gracious, and I think handled it with incredible aplomb. She was never the kind of person to let something go to her head. She wasn't brought up to be that kind of person. She didn't believe in being that kind of person. And I think it mattered very much to her that she, not allow any of these things to, kind of throw her off her path. So what I think she would have thought of, all of this now is, I can see her kind of, being very pleased, but also feeling, as I said, kind of that she needed to be careful, to not let things keep her from what she, her writing and her work. So, she knew about the parable opera because that started when she was still alive. I mean, she didn't hear any of it, but she had given her permission. And so she knew that was happening. And Kindred was under option for years. I mean, almost from the time I started, not when I started representing her, but pretty soon in. Different people had it under option. And so, she got some money, which was nice. And yet, she would sometimes say, well, I'm getting paid for it, but I haven't had to see something made that maybe I wasn't going to love. I think authors feel that way sometimes. But she, I think she would definitely, of course she would be pleased. And I think it would be a struggle for her to be able to keep the time to write, because I think now even more she would be in demand. And she used to, she spoke when people asked her to come and speak. She went to so many schools and libraries, and if she wanted to, if she were with us now and she wanted to, she could probably, well, not now in COVID, but I'm sure she could have been one of those people who does speaking tours, but then when do you write? It's a tough thing to juggle.
She'd be Zooming all day.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said there. And I know I just asked the last question, Monica, so
go ahead.
It out. But you did bring up Kindred and the fact that it was under option so many times. I think I even had a conversation with one set of those producers years ago, when they were trying to develop Kindred, and had some questions. This is something that comes up a lot. I work in Hollywood, and I know a lot of people who are always looking for Octavia's work. So let's speak to that. How many kinds of requests do you get, and what goes into your decision-making process in terms of what you approve and what you don't approve in terms of licensing Octavia's work and optioning her work?
Yeah.
Well, the goal is to get something made that will be obviously as wonderful as possible, and something that we feel, that the estate, her cousin and I feel that it's really important that women of color be involved as in as many roles as possible. And I can say that is the case with everything that is in development. People come to me, wonderful people come to me all the time, students, or people who haven't maybe, or who are still kind of developing their career in Hollywood. And of course, the goal is to also work with people who can actually get something made. So that's what we look for. You look for the parties, and as you know, of course, you can have a lot of people involved in a production. The producer, the writer, the director, all of them. And we just want there to be people who can, a team with, some women of color and people who have, the power to do things. Sometimes both, like Viola Davis.
Right.
And
she's involved with Dawn, because there are a couple that have been announced. So Dawn, we know publicly, is in development.
No, she's involved. That's Ava.
That's why I'm seeing. Right. I'm confusing them.
another really powerful woman of color in Hollywood, which is
right.
Great.
So forgive me, Ava. It's Ava DuVernay developing Dawn.
Yep.
And Viola Davis with Wild Seed
producing. Yeah.
Both of whom are all welcome to join us on the Octavia Tri-Series. I feel like if Octavia put it out there, this is her goal.
She did. Yeah, so we, those are the things that are going on right now. And there's some more that I'm not supposed to talk about yet. And as soon as I can, I will.
Well, a question we get a lot is for so many people who are listening and who are tuning in and who have been watching the recordings have said that they weren't familiar even with Parable the Sower before May. And so if people I know are, sometimes it's just like, where did you go to school, right? Who was teaching different things?
Right, can you read?
Right, or some, I remember even years ago, had this very narrow idea of science fiction because of what was introduced to me in school. And
Right.
I was like, well, I'm not really feeling that. And because I didn't know if they were Black women protagonists. And then I was like, oh, when you see yourself, right, in
Sure.
things, connect with it. So I imagine somebody might have given up before they even found out. But as people are really getting into Parable and Parable the Sower, Parable of the Talents, and a question we get a lot is, what's the next Octavia book I should read? So I am totally biased and I slant toward the Pattern Master series because people don't talk about it as much. And I love the image in my head of how everything looks is just astounding. But I would love to hear for you, what would you say, what's the next book you should read after your Parable series?
Well, if you're a person who hasn't read a lot of science fiction, or you're someone who doesn't have, for whom contemplating reading 4 books is a little overwhelming, I often refer people to Fledgling, because I feel that was the last book that she wrote, and it's very accessible. Like, if you are still someone who's like, science fiction, I don't know, other planets. Fledgling is, it uses the tropes of the vampire story, and it takes place in our world, and it's an incredibly interesting and riveting book of story, kind of examining race, sexuality, power, through the lens of sort of the vampire story, and it's a standalone, so people who can't read 4 books can read that one. And then,
although I always wanted more. When I read it, I was like, I need Fledgling too, right?
Yeah. I know.
I guess that's the mark of a good writer. You want more.
Exactly.
I feel the same way about your books, Tananarive. I still want more of the Blood series. I know you might be
definitely
done. I want more. So you've done your writer job.
Well, I appreciate that. But yes, I mean, in terms of Octavia's vision, especially the prophetic nature of the Parable series in particular that has brought us all to this webinar, and really has also, I think, created the phenomenon that she's on the New York Times bestseller list at this moment in history. I'm wondering, Merrilee, based on the conversations you had with her, all the reading she did, I know just from an interview my husband Stephen Barnes and I did with her that she was very concerned about climate change and these kinds of issues. How do you think personally that her prophetic vision can be mobilized to help people? I know this is a tough question. So you're channeling you, and you're also channeling Octavia maybe when you try to answer this, to try to move people out of this despair and toward better leadership, toward hope. There's that kernel of hope in Parable of the Sower that she created with Earthseed. So she didn't just give us the gloom and doom. Right. She gave us the hope to carry with us, right?
Acorn. So Earthseed.
Yeah. How do you think we all can help mobilize her vision?
Last night when, like many people, we were sitting down to our Rosh Hashanah Happy New Year dinner, and we got the news about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it was such a horrendous and stunning blow. And, but, and people were texting me, and all my friends, all my women friends, especially, oh my God, what do we do? And people were, and within, half an hour, people were talking about what we can do, turn the Senate, support the candidates in the states that can make a difference, vote. I think voting, I think Octavia would probably say that too. I think voting would be a number one act that everybody can take. And, don't be put off by, the I don't know, all the misinformation that's out there. And I think that she would want certainly people to, read her books and know that it's fiction, even though, what this whole panel is about is how she warned us. She would probably say, people, what you can do is you can vote. You have power, and you have to use it.
That's beautiful. I love that. I'm just writing it down.
Well, I'm not the only person saying that, boy.
I know, but it's just, I think we all need that reminder because it's so easy in a place of despair to feel helpless and hopeless.
Exactly. And then you can say, why should I? And, my vote's not going to get counted anyway. And, people who serve their time in prison aren't being allowed to vote. It's horrendous, and I could totally see people just shrugging and saying, neither, I don't like either candidate, but there is a difference. And, anyway, you didn't ask my politics. I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny because we started this thinking about the pandemic, and we said that it's really kind of a parable for this pandemic and for the politics.
Yeah.
Because, the only thing that Octavia missed was the fashion masks, right? And the actual viral contagion that's going on. But everything else seems so foreseeable. One thing that I love, especially when I've been teaching Octavia's works and Parable, is, these great Black women protagonists that she has in her book. And, which I think in many ways connects with, how we saw Ruth Bader Ginsburg as like our strong female protagonist, in the court or in this arena. And I'd love if you could maybe chat with us a little bit about, in my just recollection, this isn't all her work, right? And this is what makes so much of her work different and probably revolutionary when she began writing, right? Was to have these, almost unexpected, right? Black women, well, when there is a race category, protagonists who are saving the world, right? Or changing the world, or changing society.
And because, when she first started publishing her books, in the 70s, science fiction was, books were published differently than the way they're published now, of course, and sold differently. No Amazon, ebooks, mass market was kind of the ebook, or, and so paperbacks and science, you kind of had to either be a category like science fiction, romance, mystery, or you were, literary fiction. And if you wrote science fiction, it could never be literary fiction, even if it was gorgeously written, full of interesting ideas, and sadly, back then also, writing about Black women, Black people was also not considered, a commercial venture. So anyway, the way she was published in the first place was science fiction. And that meant that, the way to sell her books was to put something science fiction-y on the cover. You know, certainly not a Black woman. You know, something that maybe looked like an alien or a spaceship, or, you know,
like those early Genesis covers, right?
And then hope that, you know, people in the science fiction section who would pick it up. And what I think what happened was, people in the science fiction world, you know, the other writers read her books and were just blown away. But a lot of the people who were looking for something, you know, kind of white guy science fiction, for lack of a better phrase, and there are many white guys who wrote really good science fiction. They would be a little bit sometimes put off by her books, you know, the sort of general reader, because, you know, they were feminist, they were, you know, they just weren't what they were expecting. So they didn't sell that well. And, but meanwhile, she was absolutely recognized by her peers and, you know, and given awards. But it wasn't until she got the MacArthur that the rest of the world kind of started to go, oh, I guess she must be a serious writer because, you know, they gave her a MacArthur. So, and meanwhile, you know, things were changing in the world of publishing as well. Terry McMillan published Waiting to Exhale, which was a #1 bestseller, and it changed so much. Just people were like, oh, okay, there's a big readership. And that just kind of really turned the tide in some ways. Someone who was writing about her recently made a comment that, you know, her photo wasn't in her books or on her books. And first of all, I'm sorry to say that she was one of those people who didn't like pictures of herself. And but I think it's also true that a lot of, I mean, I'd have to go and look, but a lot of books didn't have the author's photo, especially the paperbacks. And, you know, it wasn't that uncommon. And but now, of course, you know, there are so many, unfortunately, there aren't enough wonderful pictures of her because she was a little averse to having her photo taken. It was something she kind of had to get used to. But anyway, I think that was, you know, her sort of trajectory followed kind of a big change in the world of publishing. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I'm pausing because I am furiously tweeting, and I'm so sorry. I'm so excited that you just mentioned Terry McMillan and Waiting to Exhale, because I don't think a lot of people understand how impactful that book was for Black writers. And I have mentioned that many times in my own personal story of how lucky I was that I started publishing in 1995.
Yeah.
Feel the Terry McMillan, because without that, who knows how long it would have taken for me to find a home as a Black speculative writer myself. So that is a really important point you just made about Terry McMillan. And now, of course, Octavia herself is part of that catalyst in developing not just readership, but creators who, like Monica said, had been turned off by science fiction. They didn't see themselves reflected there or their concerns reflected there. And now they realize, oh, this thing that I thought was science fiction is actually, now we call it Afrofuturism when we have
right.
But she's opened the door for so many creators. When you look at the landscape now compared to
fantastic,
right? It's amazing.
It's wonderful. I know. Makes me so happy, and it would have made her tremendously happy.
Octavia's brood, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Literally. So many of us. She's the godmother. really, I mean, she didn't probably consider herself an Afrofuturist because the term was not in wide.
Didn't exist.
It was just like Black women in science fiction, and they were like for y'all or something for a minute. Right?
For a while.
But now, of course, and the way that I teach Afrofuturism at UCLA is, I think that that word futurism is somewhat misleading, because it's like Kindred, I would say, is a good example of how it's also embracing lessons from the past. So we're writing about Black survivability and Black thriving and existence in the future, which is something that we have been so long denied in popular media. But it's also, like Parable of the Sower, addressing either the present or the rapidly approaching present, while also honoring tradition, ritual, the past. You know, you don't have to put the baby with the bathwater. It's existing in 3 planes at once: past, present, and future. So I
mean, in time travel, right?
Her work fits so well in all those slots. You have the technology and the biology, you have the history, you have the sociology. She's basically a whole course, like a whole department in one as a writer.
Yeah. I think so. And you know, I've been reading Caste, which is, you know, an amazing book, which is about, you know, how the present got here, how we got to this present in our country. And just as I think, you know, Octavia, even though her visions were so dark, they were also optimistic, because I think part of what drove her was the belief that we could change things, you know, that they didn't have to be this way. And I'm, you know, I hope that people who are reading her books and reading books like Caste are seeing a way that we can change, and we can change the way the world is going. You know, she created her characters, her strong women characters were flawed and complex. I mean, like Lauren Olamina, the character in Parable of the Sower, the young, you know, she's like 15 and she sort of accidentally starts a religion. You know, that was not her intention. And as you know, things don't all go that well for her, even though she had a vision and was strong and, you know, wanted to help. It's I don't know. I just think, I'm so glad that, you know, people are teaching her books in school. I wish I had read them in school.
You and me both. I would have spent a lot less time finding my voice as a writer if I had been exposed to Octavia's work as a high school, or even frankly a college student. I was midway through my second novel before I ever read Wild Seed. So it's like,
wow.
But it was just such a privilege to know her, however briefly. My husband, Stephen Barnes, knew her for 20 years more personally, and I was kind of plus one in there. But so I would just sit at her feet and listen to her laugh with him and enjoy her brilliance and her passion. And, you know, you mentioned sort of how difficult some of Octavia's work is in terms of the emotions. The word we used in the interview was thread of pessimism, and she was like, moi?
Yeah.
But I feel like she was able to put so much of her fear into her writing that it gave her a kind of strength, hopefully. I mean, what's your impression of what her relationship was between her personal emotions and her expression through art?
Well, you know, as someone who has all my career for, you know, 30 years now represented writers, you know, who are imaginative, you know, of course, one thinks about, well, you know, what in your life, you know, what makes you write what you write, and and in Octavia's case, you know, she had a mother who, you know, was a person of faith, and she was brought up with, you know, very, you know, those really positive, but also sometimes, you know, difficult rules, and I think, you know, from having read a lot of her journals and things, not journals, but, you know, some of the things she would write to herself that I read in the archives, she, you know, she definitely chafed in some ways, but she was also, as an only child, she had, you know, her mother adored her, but she, you know, she lived in her head as a kid. She didn't have, you know, she read books. And she started writing her own stories when she was a little girl, and she saved everything. And the fact that she saved things she wrote, drawings, from the time she was, you know, 9 years old, 10 years old. But I think she put everything into her writing. I think that was how she, you know, channeled it. But, you know, being a Black woman growing up when she grew up, you know, I can't imagine. It was probably, she was looking at the world. She was smart. It was also, she was in the LA area when, you know, all the, you know, the Black Power was happening. And, you know, I just think she took in all of it and channeled her emotions into, you know, the stories of the women in her books. You know, it doesn't mean all of that, of course, happened to her, because, you know, obviously it didn't. But, you know, she chose to live a life where she wasn't going to have a lot of people interrupting her for things. You know, she chose to be single. She chose, you know, not to have children. She didn't even have a cat. And she, you know, she made it so that she could create what she created. And what it takes emotionally to do that, it's a huge price she paid, really. It was a choice, but it was a big price.
That's a beautiful response. I you know, I'm so moved by it. I remember her talking about a cat who tried to kind of crash into her house and make a home there, and she wasn't having it. So it all rings true. She really
goldfish, Octavia. At least a goldfish, something.
She really did give it everything. Steve says she's the purest writer.
Yes,
in that sense.
Exactly. She was the real deal.
I mean, and I think that, I'm thinking that sacrifice, right, that she made in some ways, that choice, the commitment to her art is what's saving us now in so many ways, right? What's giving us a roadmap, what's giving us some hope or a bit of a model, right? I mean, we we collectively didn't stop, right, what she foresaw happening. But, you know, we do have this model of, now that we're here, how do we move forward? How do we form community, right? How do we survive? And so that's, you know, her gift to us.
Yeah.
This conversation, you know, the fact that we can come together and this webinar series, this is our 8th one, I believe, right, Monica? So
it is.
This webinar series, I know, has been such a bright spot and support for me to come together with other people who loved Octavia's work, loved her as a person, but also as an artist, and how she used her vision to try to guide us past times like these, or really, as you said, to help us prevent times like these, hopefully. But the prevention part isn't going to happen.
Yeah, a little late.
Here we are. And what we're left with is, in book after book after book, the strength of community serves as a force to confront difficult times. And that's one of the biggest lessons. And there's a whole community around Octavia that is growing. And I think one quick last question, I don't know if you have another question, Monica, but as surprised as you were to see Parable of the Sower on the New York Times list, you must have, or I'm hoping you have some notion of what happened. You know, I mean, I know.
Well, yes. I mean, what was happening were a number of things. Her paperback publisher that was reissuing all of her books with these really beautiful new covers that so stores, I think stores were taking more of her books, especially Parable, which was the first one of the new covers to come out. And so they were ordering more. But meanwhile, this community that you're talking about has been discovering her and talking about her more and more in all these, little fires all over the place that are, kind of feeding each other. So there are, there's your webinar, there's Toshi's podcast, there are so many reading groups talking about her books. I mean, it's I see it everywhere all the time. I was telling you earlier, I have my Octavia Butler Google alert, and things come up constantly that I didn't know about. And so when people say to me, I still sometimes get people who say, "Oh, Octavia Butler, wait, have I heard of her?" I just think, oh my God, are you alive? But it is something recent, that I guess it's just the mass of it. But it does take a certain velocity of sale to get onto the bestseller list. And as you know, as an author, when you have a new book coming out, your publisher wants, that first week on sale, let's do the book tour, let's try to get as many out there, pre-sales, pushing pre-sales. And something happened. There were just so many people who decided to buy this book that week. And it did fall off the list after, but I'm hoping it'll come back, and probably will, and probably her other books too. Someone asked me, well, what book should people read next after Parable of the Sower? Well, Parable of the Talents. I mean, these are these two books go together. It's really almost one big story, and I think that's probably going to be the next bump. And hopefully these TV shows that are being created will, of course, bring more awareness of her work.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people who are worried about adaptation. There's no bad adaptation that can destroy a book.
Right.
And it will send people to actually read the source material. And
ideally.
And I cannot wait for that day.
Good. Me too.
Me three. We're so glad to have you. We thank you for taking this time with us, particularly on your holy days.
Oh, thank you. It was really fun and such an honor, and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
And we want you to have a chance to tell people how they can find you and what to do next. So can you share a bit about that?
Well, you've got the octaviabutler.com, and my contact info is there. And we'll be, posting information about Octavia and her books. Her digital publisher, Open Road, they often do those, they'll one book will be available one day for $1.99, those, and we'll put the information up there so you can watch for it. And as an agent, it's such an honor and a huge and unusual job to be representing an author who is no longer with us, but whose career is exploding. But I would love to find other authors who have a voice and a story to tell.
I know there are many listening who are happy to hear that, and will be looking you up quite soon. So thank you. Tananarive, do you want to chat a bit about our Shaping Change workshop?
Absolutely. Many of you may know, or some of you don't, that once we started these free Octavia Tried webinars, we realized that people were craving so much community, and we couldn't keep up our early pace. We were doing them every week. And we're like, well, we have to slow down. So we created a nominally paid workshop called Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change Workshop, where we talk about the 7 steps of Octavia's method of shaping change, ongoing discussion of Octavia Butler's work and influence in social media and on our course site. We're working on the final stages of our Shaping Change e-journal with writing prompts, interaction with me. I mean, you get to see and hear us during this webinar because they're so large. There are almost 200 people here. We don't have you on screen. We're not able to interact with you. So with a smaller workshop, it's more of a personal, interactive space where you can share more of your stories and your experiences, what's in your go bag, and what's been going on with you this month. And we have a social media group. And as a sign-up bonus, you heard me mention this interview that Steve and I did with Octavia Butler in the year 2000, and it was for a magazine called American Visions, but it's Octavia speaking in her own words, everything from her writing advice, her fears of climate change. You'll get to see a glimpse of the Octavia we got to know, and that workshop is, oh my gosh, Monica, what is the URL?
There it is, Octavia Webinar.
OctaviaWebinar.com. So we've been underway for a few months. There's already a very vibrant and active group in social media. We hope you'll have a chance to join us.
So we thank you, as always, for joining us. As we often say, this is our gift as well. It's a gift to us, and it's a gift, hopefully, for the wider community. Oops, and there we go. And it's just great, so wonderful to have you here with us, Merrilee, and to have the whole, I guess, I feel like we're like a real big family, right? The Octavia Tried community.
We are.
Oh.
We are.
Well, this was great. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you being here. And it's lifted my spirits. I hope it's also lifted yours. Not just
absolutely.
You. For all of you who are listening, remember the hope embedded in even the most difficult of Octavia's works. And let's take care of each other and take care of ourselves.